Leave it.
All right.
You
Just
can
leave
do
it all in.
it.
Got it.
All right.
All right. Now we're good.
We're good.
Okay. Let's do this. All right, everybody. Welcome back. I'm Chris Allen, the co-host of the Dynasty Owners Manual Pod.
And I'm Adam Wilde, the other co-host of the Dynasty Owners Manual podcast, and I'll get us started with the foreword. So we just finished recording our second DLS episode. First awesome one. We ran through it the first week and just got some feedback, got some good feedback, and we edited, we fixed some things. We got green screen. So if anything, come for the green screens because we have cool logos in the background. Every week, Devy Owners Manual is working hard. So they've got new content for 2020 coming out, and they've been working a lot on that. And the Best Ball Owners Manual is actually coming out with quite a few pods coming soon. So you're going to get help with those draft teams because I know everybody is fighting the temptation to jump in those right now. Other than that, just tune in for the DLF show, and we've got a lot of good content coming with the rest of the offseason.
Yeah, I think that so far, I mean, it's we're halfway through May, and I mean, we've been kind of pumping out content on a weekly basis between this, DLF, Devy, Best Ball. I mean, we're just owner's manual all over the place, and I think it's been really, really great to see like the entire crew putting out content. And but speaking of content, I mean, if you're checking out content, I think one of the, especially during the in-season, one of the, I guess, key sites that I typically go to myself, and I think Adam, like you probably read through some of their stuff, is Roto World. I mean, the Godfather, at least that I consider to be the Godfather, Evan Silva. I mean, always pumping out content for Roto World, but also the Quant Edge. I mean, the folks over there. I mean, Elliot. I mean, Brad. I mean, Mr. Reyes himself. I mean, coming from over there. But of course, I mean, I guess at the intersection lies our guest tonight, Mr. Connor Allen. We thank you for coming out tonight, of course, in order to speak to us. And we wanted to talk to you about ranks. I mean, everybody wants to talk about rankings and see how people value players and I guess their process for, I guess, for how they come up with valuing them. And we spent quite a bit of time over the last couple of weeks talking about wide receivers. So we wanted to talk to you about running backs tonight. So when it comes to drafting running backs, we're talking about a position that requires a lot of volume. So we're talking about high injury rates. We're talking about players that need durability. But if you look at specific cases, and some cases that we've seen, some of these players, they might not have at least a ton of production in college. They might not have been able to carry or have similar workloads as we would project them to have in the NFL. So when it comes to us having to value them now once they transition to the NFL, a lot of people have the argument or the narrative to say that, well, they've never done it in college. I mean, Josh Jacobs, like he never did it in college. I mean, he was a part of the committee with Damian Harris. So, I mean, how can we project him to now completely take over that Oakland Raiders backfield? I mean, things of that nature. So when it comes to, when you hear narratives like that, I guess, what is the proper counter argument to that? Or what's a different perspective that dynasty managers can have in order to, again, properly value that player that they're trying to put on their team?
Yeah, so first off, thank you guys for having me on. It's awesome to talk some football. But yeah, so this is a super good question. I think that the he's never done it in college take is a really, really popular one. And I think that it depends kind of on what you're referring to because we see it a lot. We see it sometimes, oh, this player never reached 1,000 yards in college. We see it as, oh, this player didn't meet X statistical threshold. But I think that what combats this is how a player's traits project to the NFL. So a guy like Josh Jacobs, you know that he is a great pass catcher and you know that he's an aggressive runner, even though he didn't meet the athleticism thresholds a lot of people like, and even though he didn't meet a lot of production thresholds people like. So I think that that you can kind of take the other strategy as far as like contextualizing how that player fits in the NFL. So I think that for Jacobs, it's a little tough for me because I think that some of the he's never done an argument is a little bit valid there as far as the workload goes because looking at his high school, I mean, he's never had more than 160 touches like combined in a season ever since high school, which is, I think, gives me a concern from like an efficiency and potentially like a longevity standpoint as far as him as a player. But with a lot of other people, you see like, oh, he can't catch passes. And then you have to contextualize that by looking at the offense that he played in college. So because sometimes college coaches don't even have their guys running pass routes. You don't even have their running backs. They just have them staying in the block.
Yep.
Or, yeah, so exactly. And then you also have them sometimes playing with run-heavy quarterbacks who tend to throw less to their running backs because they can scramble instead for longer runs or potentially do it on their own. So then running backs aren't given the exact same opportunity. So being able to contextualize it with their college and kind of see how their traits project in the NFL would be probably one of my best arguments to that.
And Josh Jacobs is a perfect example of why you have to use everything in your arsenal rather than just saying that I'm going to look at production. Production's my favorite, but you also have to look at film as well, because you can look at his catch total and say that the guy can't catch, but then you watch him catch. He's running routes like a slot receiver, and he catches great. I think his catches, his hands are fluid. I think he transitions to run well. He builds a great – he's got great contact balance like immediately after the catch. So you can look at just a few plays and say he can actually catch. But like you said, Connor, if they didn't use him that way, he couldn't do it. He can't call his own plays. So I will say for myself that Jacobs was my running back 2 for a very long time. He then made his way to running back 1, and then I've decided that he was my 101 over N'Keal. Even though I love N'Keal, I think that Jacobs is going to have a better chance to see an ADP boost in year 1, and then maybe I can trade for N'Keal plus in year 2. But contextualizing is the best word to use probably for the whole show, because there's never going to be a perfect prospect unless you have Saquon Barkley. And the problem with Josh Jacobs is that context is so key. So what I did is I said, why does Josh Jacobs not have the production? And the answer to that was he was an underclassman. I don't watch college, so I don't really know how that factors. An underclassman behind an established running back who fit the system better. So, Damian Harris is that ground and pound running back. Jacobs fit the team better to come in and catch balls and change pace. And Alabama's going to use their running backs to the best of their ability for Alabama to win football games, not for Josh Jacobs to look like an NFL prospect. So maybe he didn't get used to his full potential, but I think he did enough to demonstrate that he can be used to his full potential when he gets to the NFL.
And I think that's fair. And then from what both of you guys are telling me, and the other facet that I'll kind of put on this is that, and I think this is something that when we spoke to the Dynasty dummies, so both Zach and Kyle, when they sat down and we talked with them maybe about 6 weeks ago or so, while the way that we feel about players and what we've seen them do after looking back at some of their tape and the highlights from some of their best games and things of that nature, and we come up with the way that we feel about them, looking at their draft capital and seeing how the teams feel about them, that also has to be factored in. Their situation matters. So when it comes to especially a player like in Josh Jacobs' situation, I mean, the draft capital that was spent on him and also the role that he's looking to inherit within that team, I mean, that has to at least give you some pause in terms of how you want to value that player moving forward. So while I do believe that he hasn't done it in college take matters, again, contextualizing what he's been able to do or how he was used in college, while it matters, I think also what should matter, what should be another piece to the puzzle that we need to put together is how does his NFL team see him? How does his NFL team value him? And so clearly with what Oakland spent in order to pick him up and also the role that he's walking into, that has to factor into how we would want to proceed in terms of drafting him. So I wouldn't necessarily say that just because that he didn't do it in college, that means 1, he can't do it in the NFL, and also 2, that means that he's not valued or shouldn't be valued at the way that we're projecting him to be. Because again, if the NFL now wants to push him into that role, we almost need to kind of like bend to their will and say that, all right, well, if that's the way that they want to push him, if that's the volume that we can project or easily project for him to have, then I think that should be something that we should take into account.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think also kind of brings up another strategical point that like our opinions and what we see of a player doesn't really matter. Like what the NFL thinks matters, because that's what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like what these guys say is going to happen. And because they're calling the shots, you know what I mean? So even if we're like, Josh Jacobs should be in like a 12 to 15 touch Alvin Kamara role, which is what I thought would probably suit his skill set best. That's not going to be the case. Like he's going to be thrust. He's going to be thrust into probably a really heavy workload as a rookie, and that's what I fully expect to happen. So yeah, I think that's like something that sometimes in fantasy, especially among dynasty, players, sometimes we kind of we're like, separate from reality, and we need to sometimes like reel it in and understand like, okay, so this is what's going to happen, so we need to go off of that and kind of operate in that realm of possibilities.
Yeah, and I think the hardest thing, and I guess an analogous situation to that is the Mecole Hardman situation, because I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Is that like, while I did not value Hardman the same way that I'm yet to hear, or I do not remember anybody seeing or talking too much about him pre-draft, but now post-draft, with where the Kansas City Chiefs are at right now with the Tyreek Hill situation, the way that Hardman profiles what he was able to do or how he was able to produce in college, how like the draft capital that the Chiefs spent in order to acquire him, that has to matter. So while from a production standpoint and from an athleticism standpoint, sure, you can make the argument that Tyreek Hill, he's a unicorn. Hardman, probably doesn't come close in terms of the athleticism, but if that's the way the team now wants to use him, assuming that Hill is going to be gone from the team, we have to take that into account.
Sure.
I mean, we can't just completely dismiss it and say, well, that guy is not the guy that we want him to be, so it's just, it's a square hole, round peg, like that sort of situation, and we're just going to dismiss it. No, that has to matter, because that's what the team is going to do. They're going to put him out on the field in that role.
We can never get away from these wide receivers.
No,
Mecole is tearing me apart because I'm not interested, but I think that opportunity is king over all else. I think that we have to do our best to get the dominator scores, the metrics from the combine, the college production. We're going to put all this into a pie chart, and it's only going to make up 25% of the pie chart. And then the other 75% is just going to be opportunity. So where I'm not saying we shouldn't do the rest, I think we're working very, very hard to fill 25% of the pie chart. And then the other 75% of the pie chart is going to be filled for us by the NFL. So obviously we did a lot of work on the 25% of Mecole Hardman's pie chart, but it obviously didn't matter, because none of the work that we did translated to the capital that he was given or to the situation that he was given. So now we have 75% of his pie chart saying, buy me at all costs, because he's going to get all the opportunity in the world. He was drafted high enough. He's on the highest power offense in the league. He's got the opportunity being presented to him by Tyreek leaving. Sammy Watkins always gets hurt. There's not really a wide receiver 3 that you're excited about. So everything points to his production. And that's why it's ripping me apart, because I don't know why I don't like him more.
Right, and I think that's the thing, especially so now moving back to the running backs, that's the thing that we really need to kind of take into account. So now let's look at your ranks specifically. We'll tweet out the link after we're done, but you put out a set of ranks like on Roto World, and we just want to focus on the running backs. And so based off of your ranks, I encourage people to go out and read that piece. But let's try and look at this from a practical application standpoint. So you have your ranks set out, but now how do you transition your ranks, or how do you use your ranks like when you're starting to fill out your dynasty rosters? Like, are you a best player available type of guy, or when it comes to trying to assess value, are you trying to plug in holes as you see fit, like based off of team needs, or what is your approach to dynasty?
Yeah, so I would say that it obviously depends on the severity of need, but I would say over 90% of the time I'm going best player available, because that player provides more value for your team. And I think that that's an important part of dynasty, is that if you believe that player is going to provide more value, then you should have him and can always trade for a position if you really need it. But I'm not really super into the whole position of need thing, because I think that you can always find ways around that, especially if your league is semi-active. Another thing to consider too, and something that I really like to do with rookie drafts, is mostly tier-based drafting. As you can see, so my article on Roto World is all tiers, and that's a big thing for me too. So like if I have if I have a running back that is in tier 1 for me, but I don't really need running backs, and then I have, my position of need, those wide receiver, and it's tier 2, I'm definitely going to still take the running back because it's a tier 1 guy for me that I think provides more value in the long run. Whereas the wide receiver, while it might maybe help me, which it might not even, because rookies generally don't make an impact right away a lot of times, especially at the wide receiver position. So it takes them a little bit longer to develop, and they might not even be able to fill your hole that you already drafted them to. So I think that for me, it's almost always best player available. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but that's generally my approach.
And that's very well put, Connor, because we harped on best player available a ton last week, so much so that I had to reel it back because I felt like we were being too aggressive to anybody that didn't draft best player available.
We were hyped up.
To me, it only makes sense to do best player available, but over the last week after I listened back to the podcast, I started thinking about it, and I said, well, is there situations where I wouldn't go best player available? Because if you look some of my teams, people think I'm crazy because I have 19 wide receivers, 3 running backs, and my only quarterback's Kyler Murray. And it's like, what is this dude doing? But it's going to look so different by the time it's time to start a lineup. The problem, though, is that you are very reliant on the other 11 people in your league being active. So I will say the caveat to best player available that I was able to find after thinking back towards last week was if your league's not that active, you probably have to worry about your starting lineup a bit more. Because when we were talking to Derek last week, it was like, when do we worry about our starting lineup? And it was basically came down to right before you have to click submit was the answer. But if your league's not active, then you can't really just do best player available because then you might go into the season with 15 wide receivers and 3 running backs. So I just wanted to add that caveat since we didn't hit on it last week. I honestly really didn't think about that instance, but I'm sure that's out there.
No, I'm sure. And this is something that I wanted to ask. Actually, wanted to ask Derek since he puts out a bunch of content. But I'll ask you the same. The same question, Connor. So in some of your leagues, because you write for a fairly prominent site, so it's at least, I guess it's a fair assumption that most folks in your league probably take a look at your ranks before they hop into the draft room with you. So has there ever been a case where your ranks have kind of been used against you and in trade negotiations and things of that nature, where people are like, well, I know you value this person this way because I read your article. Has that ever happened to you beforehand?
So luckily it hasn't really been a huge issue. Because honestly, a lot of the leagues that I play in also have analysts in them who also write content. So we know not to hold that against someone, but we also know it's in everyone's head. Everyone's reads each other articles. What I do is especially when I'm looking to trade with someone, is I'll put their handle and then the player's name on Twitter and search it to see any time that they've tweeted about that player.
That's a good idea.
To see what kind of how any kind of reaction that they've had that I can potentially use for or against them, and then I can just get a gauge. If they're like, oh, Josh Jacobs 101, he's the best. Obviously I'm not going to be able to trade him away, or I'm going to have to trade an arm and leg to get him. So it's just one of those things that I use it against other people, and it hasn't been used too hard against me, but it's something that is out there. And thankfully I published my rookie ranks a little bit after a lot of my dynasty drafts. So I got lucky there in my rookie draft. So, but yeah, it's out there, and it is what it is. If someone ever really puts me against it, I think it would be kind of funny almost. And I'd be a little frustrated, especially if it was a guy I really liked.
Yeah, I don't think that's fair.
That's actually really smart, man. That's genius to put the handle in and then see if they've said anything about a player. I've never thought about that. I was just thinking when you asked this question, Chris, about how I could pretty much guess who all of the people in our group of analysts would draft at any time. I could pretty much draft for a lot of people. I feel like I could draft for Jake. I feel like I could draft for Russ, and I would get it pretty close. So
just get DK Metcalf and you're good.
Yeah. When it comes time to draft and those guys are in the league, what I will do is when I get to later picks, I'll start looking for the player that I know that they love, and then I'm just going to look to trade them immediately. But I want to go off the show sheet just a little, Connor, and I want to jump into best player available just a little bit more, and we'll try to keep it running back centric. But can you kind of go through what best player available means in the draft, and then also what are you going to do after the draft after you've drafted best player available and you're stuck with 17 running backs and 3 wide receivers? How do you remedy that?
Yeah, so I think that's tough because that's like a pretty extreme example, because I generally like to build a pretty even roster unless I really love a player, because I think that just the way I operate in general in Dynasty is that unless I'm like really have a lot of conviction on a guy, I'm probably going to make sure to like get value and kind of let the best player available come to me. So that's just kind of how most of my rosters are built. So if I'm ever in the scenario like you're saying, where I have like 17 wide receivers, 3 running backs, I'm probably going to be looking to not necessarily trade away a guy that I just draft, but probably look to move some of my other players for like other guys. And that's kind of because if you were able to draft him and no one was trying to trade up, like it's, at least in my leagues, it's been pretty rare that someone's like really itching for that guy, unless you knowingly, like you said, would take like DK Metcalf over for Jake or something like that. Like that's a scenario where I think it's different, where you could definitely get some good value for that. But other than that, I think I probably like to try and move some of my other guys and then just see how these guys' value develops, because that's another thing with these best player available picks too, is that a lot of times the best player available to me, in my opinion, is a guy whose value is going to rise over the course of this first year and that I can sell for more the next season. So it's not someone that I even want to really sell right now, because I think that their value should rise within the next season.
No, and I think all that's fair. And when it comes to actually putting together that type of roster, I think it comes with an understanding of you're going to have to make some moves then to kind of mold that roster into what you're going to have come week 1 of the 2019 season, like that sort of thing. Okay. I mean, so while you are putting together that roster, it's like it might look funny, and like in the situation that Adam discussed, you've got 3 running backs, like umpteen wide receivers, maybe a tight end or something like that. But it comes with trading, it comes with being active in your league, and then just kind of, again, just molding it into something that you can wind up using. But now, again, focusing on the running backs, getting back to your ranks. So the way that you have them set up, I mean, the big 3 running backs are the ones that everyone's pretty much been focused on. Jacobs, Montgomery, Sanders. I mean, that seems to be the consensus, like top 3 for any draft that I've ever seen. I can't think of anything other than somebody that goes off the handle and really hates Todd Gurley and gets Henderson at some point, which is entirely possible. But regardless, I mean, just focusing in on those 3 guys, because they typically go within the first 8 or so picks. Like, are you moving up in drafts to pick any of them? I mean, if you see any of them fall past, I guess anything relative to their current ADP, what Jacobs is at 102, somewhere in there. Monty's in 105, somewhere in there. Sanders 105, 106. So, I mean, are you trying to move up, move back? Like, if you happen to see any of them fall, or I guess how are you generally approaching like seeing how they're drafted?
Yeah, so for me, just in general, my strategy with trading up or down in rookie drafts is, as I said, I have tiers to my draft. So essentially, I like to trade down within the same tier and then move up tiers when trading up. So it sounds simple, but not everyone is the same ranks as me. Not everyone is the same tiers. So for me, like I kind of mentioned, is that I really want to get guys that I like have a lot of conviction for. And so for me, a guy like that is David Montgomery. So I actually, one of my rookie drafts, I traded up to get David Montgomery, sitting at the 106. And I moved from the 109 to the 106 in order to grab Montgomery, because at the 109 for me, that's bordering on like a tier 2-3 player. And it's not really a guy that I'm super excited about. Whereas David Montgomery, I have him in my first tier and my 3rd overall player. So if I'm getting him at 106, and that's the guy that I would consider taking at 103. So essentially, like for me, it's like trading up to the 103. I figure that's worth it for me. So I'm trading up a tier and then giving up, maybe like a late, like an early 3rd or something like that, or late 2nd, just depending on the league. So, and I'm okay with that, because for me, I'm moving up a tier to get a guy that I really like while only giving up a 2nd rounder. So I think that for me, that's personally what I like to do if I have a lot of conviction about it. So now I'm not sure that I would do that for Miles Sanders. I'm not sure that I would do it for Josh Jacobs unless he felt like that 104, 105 range. And I was like really, really excited about it. But Montgomery's a player for me who I just like have a ton of conviction on. I tweeted out the other day, I think he's going to be a running back 1 in 2020. And so it's like, so a guy like that, if you believe that, you should trade a mid-second rounder or a late second rounder to go get that guy. So for me, that trading up made sense there. I think also trading back though is really viable in a lot of these leagues, and something that I've done, and trading down within your same tier. So if you are at the middle of your tier or top of your tier, and you see like a lot of the guys you value similarly, trading down 3 or 4 picks while collecting a second rounder or a player, something like that makes a lot of sense to me, because you're able to get a guy of similar value while adding another player.
And for the sake of conversation, I asked a question earlier to a bunch of people about this scenario that I had in my Dynasty rookie draft recently. So I had the 1-6 and the 108, and I wanted to get Sanders and Montgomery. I prefer Montgomery just as you do. I think that he's going to be phenomenal, and I think that he's a little underrated. I think he could go a little bit higher. But in going best player available, it kind of bit me, because I know that Miles Sanders has gotten a lot of the buzz, and he's being considered as the running back 1 by some, pretty firmly at running back 2 by a lot. So I had to make the decision who's going to survive the 107 more likely. So what I ended up doing is taking Sanders at 1-6, because I thought that it was more likely that Montgomery passed the 107 to get to 108 than it was that Sanders would. Of course, I draft Sanders and the guy takes Montgomery, and I get stuck. I think I took DK at 8, but as you said, that's a big teardrop. I think DK is fine. I think I like the landing spot. I think he's undervalued, which means he's being drafted later in startup ADP, which means that his ADP is going to rise, like you alluded to earlier. However, that's a huge teardrop, and that kind of goes with the conversation today. If I took Montgomery there, it would have been, DK instead of Sanders, and I personally would have rathered Montgomery. But then, of course, I go to trade the guy, and I know that he wants Sanders, but he won't add anything to it. So now I'm at the point where I have to bring myself to say, okay, do I want to correct my error during the draft, because I'm sure I could just trade on Montgomery straight up, or do I want to diversify, because I have so many David Montgomery shares already? But that's an instance where you try to go best player available, and sometimes it might bite you. And I'll even add real quick that rookie drafts are more condensed. So your 2 players are really close in rookie drafts, but they might be 20 to 30 to 40 players apart in startup ADP. That's a big deal, and that's something to look at. So when you have your rankings up for your rookie draft, also bring up startup ADP, because what you want to do is see Sanders is in the 5th round and David Montgomery is in the 5th round, and then DK's in the 8th round. Okay, well, you would easily trade a late second to get from the 8th round to the 5th round in a startup. So that's something to consider when you're in a rookie draft and you're about to get to a tier that's going to be a 30-player drop in total ADP. Just give up that second, and you're essentially jumping up 3 startup rounds.
I hadn't even thought about that. And I think that's one of the best comparisons that you can make in terms of understanding not just where the rookie compares to within the rest of within his tier, well, not just within his tier, within his class rather. But then now if you want to compare that to how it would then translate into the rest of the NFL player pool, pull up his startup ADP and see kind of where that player seems to fall and where those gaps start to lie in. That delta, if it's like multiple rounds, that's where you can kind of leverage some of that value and see if there's some moves that can be made for those players. So I like that. That's actually really useful. But one of the things, so now, moving on just real quick, one of the things that I noticed in your article was talking specifically about, we've already talked a bit about Josh Jacobs already, but just looking in, so you were saying for win now teams, Jacobs is your RB1. And then if you're rebuilding, you're going Montgomery and Sanders, and they're a bit more appealing to you. So when it comes to looking at Josh Jacobs, what's the difference in his situation versus the other 2, and why did you, I guess, bend them differently in terms of how you would approach them from a dynasty standpoint? What was the logic behind that?
So it was we did talk a little bit about Jacobs already, and it's kind of related to that. So like we said, that we need to operate in the realm of what's going to happen. So what's going to happen is Josh Jacobs is going to receive 250 plus touches next season. And that's great for a win now team. That's perfect. That's what you want. You want a guy who's going to get a ton of volume, probably in the running and passing game. But kind of also, as I talked about, I have no idea how Josh Jacobs is going to hold up over 100 more touches than he's ever recorded in an entire season. We've seen running backs go from like low or middling workloads to high workloads and really struggle to retain any kind of efficiency or even stay healthy, especially towards the end of the season. So you're looking at, year one, I expect Jacobs to probably be fine. He'll probably be able to handle the workload. He could get a little bit banged up towards the end, but then it's just something that I don't really envision him being able to keep up with and be able to handle over the course of the long term. And while that may be a little bit of speculation on my end, it's something that I'm willing to bank on because it's just something that we've seen before. Like guys like we saw Lamar Miller go from like a 150, 180 touch guy in Miami to try and be used more frequently. And then and he was just awesome in Miami. And then all of a sudden, he gets that more usage and he sucks, obviously some of that has to do with the situation, but it's just one example of many which gives me pause about Jacobs long term. And this isn't to say that Jacobs is like for sure going to fail. It also has to relate to what's going on in Oakland. So, I don't like to focus on just like coach centric analysis as far as like in Dynasty, but when you're looking at a thing like the Oakland Raiders, John Gruden, who signed to a 10-year contract and figures to be around for multiple years. Basically all that I've heard from the NFL, like from Mike Lombardi and people like that listening to his podcast is that, John Gruden's basically kind of a clown. So he worked with him multiple seasons and, he has worked with other people who've worked with him and basically said that John Gruden wants what he can't have as far as players goes. He's enamored with players for a little bit, but loses interest really quickly after a season or two. And that relates mostly to skill position players and players of impact. So including quarterbacks like Derek Carr, who he's super excited about, you've seen before, and now is kind of like, I don't know. There was rumors about them trying to get Kyler Murray. And then that also applies to the running back position. So, if Jacobs isn't really doing it for him, I think that there's a chance that they could move on or just try and bring competition quicker than we think. And this is also something that I think that just kind of relates to the NFL and like isn't really necessarily dynasty related, but is something that we should look at in this instance that's so profound for me and so different than like many other instances in the NFL. That like we can actually have some kind of actual info from this. And listening to this, like Lombardi is so convinced that like John Gruden is just doing his own thing, running the show, and is just going to kind of be on his own, kind of be doing his own thing. So I'm like, I want to bet against that. Honestly, that's kind of my big thing here. And so I think Jacobs is fine for Dynasty for a few years, and you can even look to flip him after this year. He's a guy who I think his value will rise, in my opinion, after this year. But I think that long term, I'm not really as excited about him to be an RB1 for multiple seasons for years to come, due to kind of the nature of that team, as well as I'm not really sure that their offense ever ascends to becoming top 10, which limits his touchdown upside. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But I do think that they will be solid this year, but I don't think they're going to be like fantastic.
So I like what you mentioned about you can flip them at the end of this year. That's kind of my philosophy in general for Dynasty is I like my wide receivers old and my running backs rookies because you can get early production and it's usually cheapest for the rookie running backs going into good situations to be able to use them and get them instead of the established veterans because you know there's no guarantee and you do have to roll the dice a little. But I think we're on the same page with Josh Jacobs that he's going to be a pretty significant producer in the first year. Now, whether I think he's going to hold up or not doesn't really matter because if he does what I think he's going to do, I'm probably just going to sell him for a profit. And that's why I keep saying I have a bet with somebody that I'm going to bet that Josh Jacobs has a higher ADP than N'Keal Harry next year because I think that Josh Jacobs has a good chance of just going off this year. And I think N'Keal might not get the playbook right away, not any knock to N'Keal, but just because it's a very difficult system to be in. There's a lot of pressure on players coming in to the Patriots offense. So who's to say you don't grab Josh Jacobs even though you're not in love with him and you think he might not hold up and you let him just go off for maybe 280 points in your PPR league and then you flip him for a huge profit. You try again next year and hit on one of those running backs like ETN or Swift. So there you go. You take Josh Jacobs and you just keep flipping your rookie running backs, and that process works perfect.
And I think that definitely works. And so I guess, but focusing on the Oakland Raiders, I guess as a team, I think Connor, you hit the nail on the head in describing, I guess, from the front office on down to the field. I mean, there's just nothing but you can consider it to be chaos, right? I mean, we don't know what to think about Gruden, at least and then when it comes to on-field talent, we don't know how it's going to affect what we're going to or how we're going to value Derek Carr. We don't know how long Antonio Brown is really going to last or continue to perform at the level that he has. So, I mean, with everything that's kind of working on there, I mean, is there anything, at least from a Dynasty perspective, are you even interested in any Oakland Raider player in Dynasty at this point?
I mean, I think that if I have Antonio Brown and no one is willing to pay me like something reasonable, I'll probably hold him just on the hope that, he gives me some value, because I think he will get targeted, which is fine, probably like this year for sure. And then I don't really know after that, because I do think that this is Carr's last year. But I think I'm probably just holding or trying to sell him. I've been trying to sell him, but obviously it's totally league dependent on like what people are willing to pay. Tyrell, I think that he's fine. I'm not really confident that he has a lot of usable games, I guess, in fantasy, especially in Dynasty. So I'm not really on that at all. I guess in general, I'm not really super excited. I think you could consider, if you want to play like a total contrarian, I think Derek Carr is like an interesting buy low if you really want to flip the entire thing. Like if you buy it for dirt cheap, because he does have all the weapons. And if you want to like kind of reverse engineer the thinking here. But otherwise, like if I'm not getting him for pennies, I'm definitely not touching him. So.
No, and I think that's probably the right way to approach it. And I guess the only other question, I guess, and maybe we can see if there's a blueprint here that we can try to apply to other teams, because it just seems like with the amount of risk that's associated with not just one, it's not just a single player this time. I mean, it's multiple. It's both the quarterback, it's their wide receiver, it's their head coach. I mean, there's just it's a confluence of a number of factors that would kind of make you like take pause in terms of investing into that offense, regardless of the big names that are currently there. I mean, you've got the first running back draft off the board there. You have at least let's say, at replacement level quarterback in Derek Carr, maybe. But then you've got AB, you've got Tyrell. I mean, okay, so this looks like or projects to be at least a productive offense. But past 2019, I have no idea what that place is going to look like, especially after they move to Las Vegas. I have no idea what the team is going to look like. So in terms of trying to evaluate and mitigate risk, it might be, I guess, prudent for you, if you can't really see or don't understand how that team can continue to produce in 2020. Yeah, it might be time for you to try and get out at least as quickly as possible. And if you can get out for cheap or get out at a reasonable cost, then sure, why not try and implement a strategy like that? But now talking about risk, I mean, let's switch to another team in situation that has quite a bit of risk associated with it, and depending on how you look at it, and that's injury risk with the LA Rams backfield. So we know that something's up with Todd Gurley's knee. Something. Don't know specifically what. Arthritis or however you want to look at it. Fine. But now with the emergence of Darrell Henderson and with the draft capital that the Rams spent in order to acquire him, that's another black mark on his record to say that, well, Todd Gurley is not going to be one of those workhorse backs that we were drafting him as in 2017, 2018, that sort of thing. So how are you approaching this situation now from either perspective? How are you approaching Todd Gurley and his value in Dynasty? And then how are you approaching Darrell Henderson? Because I've seen his ADP right now. It's almost like, again, we keep going back to it, but like the Hardman situation where it's just the way that the team values him and where he was drafted at. Now, we have to pay attention to that. We have to take that into account. So how have you been looking at that situation?
Yeah, this is such a hard one for me, and something that I spent like way too much time thinking about when doing my rankings and kind of writing it, because for Todd Gurley, he's a huge sell for me. I think that I would put like 90% or more certainty that he will not receive the same workload that he used to. So, but for me, that doesn't mean that Darrell Henderson should be a top 5 rookie pick, because I don't think that Gurley not getting the workload he used to means that Darrell Henderson is immediately going to be like a very fantasy viable player. And I think that that's the conclusion. There's like a disconnect there that I think that that's the conclusion that some fantasy players are getting. So for me, Darrell Henderson is probably going to be like an 8 to 12 touch guy behind Gurley, who still will be the 1A to the 1B, and will probably have some standalone value kind of as like an RB3. Like you see, they've talked about him kind of in like a Lance Dunbar role, which I think is probably a good role for him. You know, like I think he's an explosive player. He tested in the 99th percentile in like 10-yard splits. I think it was 96th percentile for 20-yard split at the combine. So, you know, he's a super explosive guy. He operates extremely well in space. But for me, it's just that I haven't been able to land him really in any of my drafts because where I view him, there's so much risk involved with this because I don't really see him ever being like a running back one unless Gurley's like suffers a season-ending injury. So like arthritis is, you know, obviously it's bad, but from a lot of the people that I've been following and stuff there, it's basically just like a lingering injury that'll make him never be the same, but it's not going to knock him out. Like he'll always be there and he's still on the hook till after the 2021 season from what I saw from the contract. So, I mean, they're not going to like cut him or anything without a huge issue. So that's 3 seasons basically that he's going to be there. And Darrell Henderson is going to be behind him. I'd say that there's like slim to no chance that Darrell Henderson just outplays him and, you know, beats him out permanently unless he is just like really, really injured and we are severely underestimating this. And I don't really think that's the case, which it is possible, but I'm not really in that boat there. So I think that Henderson has a lot of risk involved, and his ceiling is not that high unless Gurley suffers a season-ending injury. So for me, I see him going like 106 to 108 sometimes. That's too much for me. I think, you know, like I would definitely be considering him like in this like early second. I think that's originally where he was going after the draft, and I was like, okay, you know, I can get behind this. There is some upside here, and he should have standalone value right away. But then, you know, now I'm just like, nah, like people are drafting him like essentially like banking on Gurley just out. So, yeah, I know that this might be a little bit of an outlier take from a lot of people, Darrell Henderson takes because, you know, the community really liked him. But, I think that it's reasonable, and this is kind of like operating in my most realistic range of outcomes.
Yeah, I liked Darrell Henderson a lot going into it too, and obviously, how do you not love Todd Gurley? But the thing that I keep saying is that you can't will Todd Gurley to health. The last thing we've seen from the guy was not being healthy, you know, and then arthritis is going to last for a while. But flip over to Darrell Henderson, he's going too high as well. I wouldn't be able to touch him until the second round either, Connor. And the thing I'm looking at here is one, Malcolm Brown is still ahead of him. He's still not even the backup, and Malcolm Brown had his offer sheet match. So say what you want about Malcolm Brown. We might not like Malcolm Brown, but obviously the Rams do because from what I understand, it was a significant offer to Malcolm Brown, and the Rams matched his restricted offer. So they thought he was the running back too. Now, we talked about this on a different show, but coach speak is one thing, but when you match Malcolm Brown's offer sheet and then immediately say that he's in your plans as your running back too, and then Darrell Henderson is your Lance Dunbar change of pace back, well, are we just willing him into the running back 2 spot again? Because it seems a lot like we're willing Todd Gurley into health and we're willing Darrell Henderson into a running back 2 role. I can't invest first round capital in that. Even in a year that people consider down, it makes me even more interested because the players are so cheap in that bottom half of the first. So you're taking so much risk when you really, I mean, if you want to take risk at the same spot that Darrell Henderson's going, just draft Mecole and you could shoot for the stars. Even if Darrell Henderson hits, you're still getting that 12 carries that you were talking about, Connor, and that's fine. And he's an explosive player, so he could do something with those 12 carries. It's just the range of outcomes seems so minute for Darrell Henderson. I mean, so many things have to happen in such a perfect way for him to have your week-to-week 8 to 10 points that you'd really like to see from him. And I'll even add that Todd Gurley does have an out in 2022 after the 4 years. but he could also be on the hook until 2023 if he wants to be. So it could be quite some time before Darrell Henderson ever even saw the field.
Yeah, and I guess this is a quick question for you guys. So, I mean, I think the Dynasty community and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Dynasty community went through something similar last season when we saw the prospect John Kelly wind up going to the Rams, because John Kelly was another one of those just Dynasty community darlings where it was just once he got stuck behind Todd Gurley, it was like the hope was that a player of Kelly's stature would wind up in a more productive situation, or at least a path to volume. And now being stuck behind Todd Gurley, that's obviously not the case. And so now we have a player like him, Malcolm Brown. Yeah, we don't really care all too terribly much about him, but still is another running back. But they might actually. Yeah, obviously we don't care about him for fantasy purposes, but the team obviously values him in such a way that they still want to keep him there. So now, and as both you and Connor made the point, I mean, it's going to take a lot in order for us to actually see Henderson get the field in high leverage situations where he's going to be getting those touchdowns and getting those high leverage touches, and then also being the primary ball carrier. It just has to be absolutely catastrophic situation in order to get him on the field. So that, at least for me personally, the cost that would come with securing a player like him is just, the risk is too great for me. I just don't see where the payoff is at given his current situation. And again, dumb question on my part, but given if you look at his situation, and then if you look at a player's situation like, and this is just off the top of my head, what about Dexter Williams? Like, what is so much worse between their path to touches, but given the cost, I mean, I could just see myself investing in a player with his situation where I could see a quicker path to touches for a player of his stature than somebody like Darrell Henderson. While I understand Henderson has the better athletic profile and also the college production, but if you look at their situations, I could see Dexter Williams touching the ball just as much in 2019. But I could be wrong, though. I mean, I'm putting that out there for you guys to maybe chew on for a second.
I mean, yeah, I don't think that's like outrageous or anything, because Dexter Williams, you're looking at a guy who is on a team with a new coaching staff, and their running back core, it's not like they don't have like a guy that they just signed to a massive contract or a player who's like their clear-cut number one. We really have no idea how that backfield's going to shake out. So yeah, Dexter Williams could absolutely end up being, one of their guys that they rotate in or potentially start with Aaron Jones. So, we really just don't know. And that's good. That's that's something that we're embracing, the uncertainty of that backfield by selecting Dexter Williams in rookie drafts. And he's been one of my favorite guys actually that I picked, because I think that there's a decent chance, or there is a chance. I mean, we just don't know. Now, if it was McCarthy who's still there, and, maybe I'd be a little bit more apprehensive, but
sure.
But I think that given the current situation, I think there's absolutely a possibility of Dexter Williams seeing more touches than Darrell Henderson this season.
And you can get him in the early to mid third.
Yes.
And so your risk is almost it's almost nothing compared to what you would have to pay in order to pick up Darrell Henderson.
And take Dexter Williams in the early third instead of taking Darrell Henderson and missing on some huge upside in guys like Mecole or Paris Campbell, because it's very situational based as to why Darrell Henderson's in the first round right now, because there is nothing that we can go off of unless you're going to go work out with Todd Gurley. Now, if Todd Gurley comes in week 1, 2, and 3 and looks like old Todd Gurley, Darrell Henderson's value can be flushed down the drain, especially if Todd Gurley gets spelled by Malcolm Brown. And then I would buy Darrell Henderson, to be honest, because that's probably the most valuable handcuff in the entire league. If Darrell Henderson turns out to be the running back 2, and Todd Gurley is, we've seen that he has a nagging knee injury, I'm interested in Darrell Henderson. But right now he's being spun the story that Todd Gurley is going to have to get spelled because his knee is just not going to hold up, and we don't know. Now, it's enough for me to not buy Todd Gurley, but it's not quite enough for me to buy Darrell Henderson in the first round. If you take Dexter Williams, I mean, Aaron Jones is healthy, and I think Aaron Jones is very talented, but you're not going to hurt my feelings taking anyone in the third round that you think has RB1 on their team upside. But I just don't know that Darrell Henderson in the first round really has the ability to pay you off at that point.
Yeah, kind of like what I was talking about earlier. Do you guys really think that it's more likely that Darrell Henderson's value goes up this next year or stays the same or goes down? I would say that it's more likely it stays the same or goes down.
Same.
Like,
Agreed.
Mhm.
So that creates like there's probably a better chance of you getting him next year for cheaper, which with still the same upside. And that's kind of why I've been, haven't really been able to get him because he's going way too early, and that risk of his value being lost or staying the same just isn't really factored in.
An excellent player, buy him next year and have a player that's on the best offense in the league potentially after Tyreek left the Chiefs presumably. But let's say that you take Mecole instead of Darrell Henderson, and Mecole's a guy that I've been missing on a lot because I'm not willing to take him early enough. But let's just say that he hits big. Well, Mecole hitting is an instant skyrocket. That's just a booster because we're drafting him that early with the intention that he will take over Tyreek's role. So if he does anything similar to taking over Tyreek's role, it's an absolute skyrocket. Now, when we're taking Darrell Henderson in the late first or mid first, it's more like, can I please just have 12 touches a game, or can I please have 10 touches a game? Can I please just have him be involved whatsoever? Can he please be the running back too? And they had to have been lying about Malcolm Brown. You shouldn't have to ask all of those questions when you can just say, I don't really like Mecole that much because I didn't know about him, but he has every single thing in his arsenal. And Mecole's just my example. I mean, I love Paris Campbell, so I didn't want to talk about a player that I absolutely love, but take either of them instead of Darrell Henderson. And then if you like Darrell Henderson like I did, I think you have a greater chance of buying him cheaper next year than you have of drafting him at his current ADP and then getting anything out of him.
I wonder, though, and now that I'm thinking about this a bit more, I'm wondering if this is almost the antithesis of the Mecole Hardman situation, where we had a player that the fantasy community, or at least the Dynasty community, was really in love with if you look at his college production, because the guy didn't he have something like 9 yards per carry?
Yeah, almost 2,000 yards, like 8.9 yards per carry.
Right. So it's like, so you have this guy that has a ton of production. Athletic profile is great. I mean, he profiles like, an NFL running back. And now he just goes to the worst situation. And now people want to now push him to the front because just like, okay, well, if all these things happen, we can actually we can get that value out of him. Where on the flip side, you have players like Hardman that's just like, well, he came out of nowhere, but now the teams are telling you how they value him. And it's like, well, no, we really don't want to value him that way. We'd rather just pay attention to the guys that we studied and we thought were great. And
that's a good point.
Racked up all this like excellent college production. So we have to value them this way because this is what they did in college. So they have to be able to do it in the NFL. And it's interesting to see the parallels in terms of how we view players that we really loved in college, but the NFL doesn't really see it the same way. And we just need somebody to explain it to them that they were really good in college, so they should value them the same way in the NFL.
Call up the coaches. But, if you want to use my pie chart analogy, we worked so hard on the 25%. And in Darrell Henderson's case, it was very easy on the 25% because he made it so easy by producing so well that we want to ignore the 75% that the NFL gave us. And it's understandable from a human nature concept because we did a lot of work and we think that he should have went somewhere better, and that's fine. I mean, they drafted him early and he's going to be very important to an NFL team, but I don't know that he even for sure he's better than Malcolm Brown, so I don't want to spend that, but I don't know for sure that the Rams are going to put him ahead of Malcolm Brown anytime soon, or if they have any incentive. I mean, if Todd Gurley goes down, I could see a discussion where it's like the Kenyon Drake and Damian Williams thing when Lamar Miller went down, where we didn't know which one was gonna start.
Yeah,
that's why would they? What's the incentive of taking this rookie and putting him at running back 2 for no reason when Malcolm Brown's been there? I just don't see any reason why they make that clear to us.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely fair. And just it was an interesting parallel or an interesting situation that I thought would be kind of pointed to bring up. But of course, Connor, we thank you for coming out tonight. I mean, all this conversation, I think, has been, made me ask questions and made me think a little bit more about some of these players and kind of how we view them. And I guess we encourage everybody to go and check out this article, any of the other stuff that you do for Roto World, TQE, Sharp Football as well. I think so. You're working with Warren too.
Yeah, I did some stuff for him before, and then occasionally I'll work with him on a few things, but not as much as I used to.
Okay. But I mean, so if there's anything else, before we get you on out of here, though, I mean, wanted to give you a second to, I guess, talk to the folks about whatever content you got coming out over the summertime during the off season, the non-point scoring season, and let people know what they can look forward to when they see your name come across their TL.
Yeah. So a lot of my Dynasty content is mostly during the rookie draft year season and stuff, and prior to the draft and everything. So a lot of my content going forward will probably be about betting, will be about redraft, and will be about kind of looking at teams from a macroscopic and microscopic point of view. I do a podcast called Move the Line with Ryan Noonan, and we do a team by team kind of divisional breakdowns that have been a lot of fun. We look at each team, kind of their betting odds to win the division, range of outcomes, everything like that has implications. And we talk about, dynasty, fantasy, pretty much every kind of format because of how we play in everything and we do everything. So we kind of try and connect to a bunch of different groups there. And I think it went pretty well. So we'll probably start that up in the next month or so. And then I'll be publishing some college football articles over at Roto World college football side. Probably just some weekly updates here and then.
Excellent, man. I can't wait to check some of that stuff out. I know Adam's really big into the betting portion. I can't do that yet. I'd lose all my money, but I know that's Adam's thing. But if people wanted to find you and check out your work through Twitter, where can they find you at?
Yeah, you can check me out at Connor Allen NFL, and then like we mentioned, Roto World, the Quant Edge, some stuff on Sharp Football. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Excellent. All right, before we get on out of here, Adam, do we have anything else for the folks tonight?
Oh, yeah, I can't wait to check out the betting content. I didn't know that, Connor. That's going to be cool because I'm going to be very interested in you telling me where to waste my money at, and hopefully we win. But I just appreciate you coming, man, and this was a good time. We got to talk about running backs for a change because we've hit wide receivers very hard. I mean, that's the polarizing position this year. We've got Devy Owner's Manual and Best Ball Owner's Manual. We're on the same feed, so I'm sure you've seen it. If you're not subscribed, please go ahead and subscribe. We always appreciate the rate and reviews. Check us out on YouTube at Dynasty Pregame. We're also on the DLF YouTube, and that's going to be the Dynasty Mailbag live show. That's a lot of fun, and we need questions for that. So if you want to send it to us through the DLF mailbag or through even the DLF Twitter handle, or just to me and Chris, to the Dynasty Owners Manual Twitter handle, anywhere you can contact us, submit questions, and we'll talk about it. We'll ramble about it. We'll get some resources, and hopefully we get a good answer for you. But thanks for coming out. You can find me at APWILDE.
Excellent. Yeah, and so for Adam, for Connor, I'm Chris Allen. You can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. We thank you all for tuning in, and we'll catch you all next week.